Welcome back, everyone. Hope you're enjoying the networking session. We're now going to have a presentation by Professor Val Okaru-Bisan. Val has over 15 years of high-level advisory work and extensive scholarly publication experience in economic development, business, trade, water, and gender sectors. She's also the CEO and founder of Afrocosmo Development Impact, LLC, a company that advises and trains SMEs to formalize and how to productize African and diaspora trade, investments, and so on. I've met Val, can't remember how many months ago, and every time we speak, I'm amazed at the amount of knowledge and experience on many things that we are, of course, extremely passionate about at Empower Africa, driving investment, trade, and job creation in Africa. So please, Val, without further ado, you're welcome to start your presentation. Please note, everyone, that there's a Q&A section in the chat area on your right. So if you have any questions, you can feel free to write it down over there. And if we have time, Val will be happy to try and answer the questions. Thank you very much. Val, the stage is yours.
Yes. Thank you, Shai, and thank you, Empower Africa, for inviting me to this very vital event, SME event. Women's Day and Women's Month. This is very vital because I'm zeroing in on female-owned SMEs. Hello, distinguished ladies and gentlemen from across the globe. Welcome to this second session. I was at the session earlier. I'll be looking at, and let me put up my slide. I'll be examining specifically the question, what are the challenges and opportunities of female-owned SMEs in Africa within the framework of the 2019 African Continental Free Trade Area and COVID-19. First, this slide, as you can see, this woman is a typical informal SME trader on the right. I actually took this picture of her, right? And the women in the middle, that's the typical example and photo of transboundary female-owned SMEs, the West Africa border, but they're all over Africa, right? And then on the left, we have these are what I call the non-survivalists, because they work in a factory, textile factory. This is actually in Kenya, but this is Nigeria, and this is on the West Africa border, right? With that as a backdrop, the next slide is on the status, because we're looking at female-owned SMEs that are operating within the framework of the Africa Continental Free Trade Area, which came into force 2019. As of today, 54 of the 55 African nations have signed this agreement. It seeks to promote trade in intra-Africa trade commodities and goods, okay? And it also aims to favor growth in the capacity of African SMEs, female SMEs too, to manufacture and export goods, especially primary products, turning primary products into finished products, right? And it also capitalizes on the 1.2 billion market and $2 trillion GDP of Africa. That's a lot, okay? So quickly, let me just share a quick statistics on SMEs in Africa, okay? SMEs are actually the backbone, we all know that, of Africa's economy. They hire at least 80% of laborers in most African nations, okay? And more than 50% of SMEs are in the informal sector, with women comprising more than 50% of that labor force in the informal sector. Now, this raises a question of formalization challenges, right? And I'll be addressing that later. Also, of more than 10 employees. That means that 98% of entrepreneurs hire less than 10 employees. So that raises the question of fragility, right? And there's an urgency to scale up in Africa for SMEs, right? And I think we discussed that in our panel, the panel we had earlier. Also, statistically, 50% of SMEs work in the services sector, while just 8% work in the manufacturing. So that raises the question of skilled versus unskilled labor. Why do most of them work in the services sector? Because you really don't need high skills to work in the services sector as you would in the manufacturing. So that raises the challenge of how to enhance and strengthen skills for SMEs, especially female-owned SMEs, okay? But SMEs contribute only 2% of GDP in most African nations. So that's tied in with the issue of formalization, right? Because governments can't capture revenues that they generate because they exist pluralistically with the government. Now, moving on to the next, statistics, the next slide. Globally, we know that 9.4 million female-owned SMEs operate in over 140 nations, right? But Africa is the only continent where, and I think Hema mentioned that too earlier in our session, where there are more women entrepreneurs than men, right? And I know this because you know, I've seen them operating on the borders of West, East, South Africa. More than 70% of transboundary trade along Rwanda's border done by women, you know, and it's not just specific to Rwanda and East Africa, you know, with its neighbors, Democratic Republic of Congo, Tanzania, and Uganda, but it also applies to Southern Africa and to West Africa, right? Now, what's the impact, or what are the impacts of AFCFTA, the Africa Continental Free Trade, and COVID-19 on female-owned survivalist SME traders? Now, we know that Article 3 and 5 of AFCFTA and Article 27 of the Protocol on Trade in Services recognizes the vitality and importance of women in promoting trade and economic development and sustainability in Africa. No doubt about it. And maybe we can go into details on the provisions, but I want to zip through this so I can have time for Q&A. Now, given the exigencies of what the provision of AFCFTA provides, the question becomes, how can African continental free trade member nations actually achieve their goal of sustainability and inclusiveness and gender equality in trade and economic development? And I believe that they must and they should address what I call six survival challenges, right? And the first one I referred to when I looked, and this is based on the statistics that we have, you know, I have addressed earlier. Formalization challenges, they must address that. And how do they do that? They have to incentivize, you know, people ask and experts ask out there, why would a female street hawker, an informal trader want to formalize? Well, it's in the interest, of course, of the government to want them to formalize, because as I mentioned earlier, government is not capturing revenue from them. So the government has to improve the ease of doing business. And I'm a member of the Nigerian community, and of course the Nigerian government goes annually to the bank to report on its progress on ease of doing business, and we sit down and listen and give some feedback to them. I think we met, the last time we met was last year, I think it was in January, February, to have some discussions, because organizations actually have a ranking of progress. You know, they rank countries based on progress that they've made. So African nations are making progress in encouraging that, you know, reducing the cost of registering and licensing your business. The whole gambit will enable, you know, SMEs to want to formalize, right? Also strengthening technical skills, right? That's my number two. Strengthening technical skills will involve, of course, the African member nations, the African Continental Free Trade member nations, creating an enabling policy and regulatory environment for SMEs to be able to strengthen their technical skills. In other words, private sector, public sector providing good, training programs for these women so that they can be more productive. And also in terms of encouraging them and providing a forum for them to be able to connect with others in the food supply chain from cradle to grave, from the farmer to the food retailer. So building the networks so that they can build their net worth, okay, from cradle to grave, okay? And also technology transfer, okay? When inviting, for instance, called the Cheetah Generation to mentor women who are there in Africa. The Cheetah Generation are returning entrepreneurs from the Western nations and the developed nations to help to mentor them on how to improve their skills, right? So there are many ways in which this can be done. Now, thirdly, scaling up. The member nations also should create an enabling policy regulatory environment for female and youth SMEs to scale up. We talked about 2%, the fact that only 2% of entrepreneurs hire, more than 10 employees. So there's a need to scale up so that they can capitalize on large economies of scale and save themselves, some money in terms of factors of the cost they pay for factors of production and the whole gambit, right? Financial capacity is the most often cited problem and solution for SMEs. And I think, there are many creative, innovative ways that organizations and the private sector have used to help SMEs to actually capitalize on their best comparative advantage to be financially sustainable. For instance, there's fintech, there's factoring. We could discuss that during Q&A, but I don't want to, expatiate on that until, maybe Q&A time. Now, in terms of non-financial capital, providing access to women to have, ability to, say, operate, I give an example, the Halal Trucks, this is non-financial capital that's provided to people who are operating, like in New York, for instance. There are ways besides financial that you can help them. If you provide trucks to street hawkers on the streets, so that they can be able to, maybe they could, rent it from the government, they could sell their food products in a very, healthy environment. That's one way, to enable them. Also, affordable factors of production, land, labor, capital, that's another way. And I did some research on the halal truck owners in New York and found that it cost them actually $20,000 to own a halal truck. And as opposed to owning a restaurant that would cost, in terms of capital cost, $500,000. So there's a possibility, there's a potential and opportunity for government to actually help those female-owned SMEs, the food, I showed you the photo earlier in the background, the first slide I had, to enable those street hawkers, very vulnerable, fragile, street traders, to be able to have economic viability and sustainability by giving them what I call fringe benefits and non-financial capital. Now, my favorite is number 6. Creating an enabling environment for public and private sector to deliver innovative, interactive, organic, capacity building initiatives that strengthen business development and trade legal policy knowledge and skills of female traders. This is so critical. This is sort of a form of street law, street policy. This is what we do, Afrocosmo Development Impact. Business and trade legal policy knowledge is so critical for those women. Some of them experience even domestic violence. Some of them have no knowledge. I had experienced, the first photo I had, let me take you back to that. This lady, across the street from where she was making her products, she was selling what you call bole, which is roasted plantains. Across the street was another woman who was making roasted yams and with stew. And then across the street from them, or down the road, was another lady selling water. And I asked them, I said, why don't you just merge? That's mergers acquisitions. So in other words, teaching women and traders exposing them to what their rights are, business rights. Trade facilitation at the grassroots level is so critical to economic viability and sustainable development. Also intellectual property rights. Why wouldn't they register their food as a trade secret, for instance? Also connecting them with the supply chain from cradle to grave, farmers, so that they can reduce the cost of paying for the product, the goods that they're purchasing, right? Business associations, exposing them to the possibility of, maybe setting up a franchise, scaling up, maybe merging with somebody else who's selling that, somebody who's their competitor. There's so many options, or maybe they don't have enough capital. They have a rich relative in the village or somewhere. That's secure transactions. You're telling them, your relative in the town could probably be a guarantor for a loan you want to get from the bank. So these are the different possibilities that we expose them to. In other words, it's called street law, business, trade law, policy facilitation, but at the grassroots level, meeting them where they are. And it's an organic, interactive process, simplified to the level where they can understand. Now, finally, because my time is up, it's 11:47, I conclude by saying that to achieve economic and industrial development, AFCTA member nations should turn the aforementioned 6 survival challenges into opportunities for female-owned SMEs to be productive. Of course, the lockdown from COVID-19 has created and worsened challenges for SMEs because they were fragile and survivalist in the first place. They rely on meager wages to survive. And of course, protectionist policies of companies and supply chain problems undermined importation of food supply to Africa. But it has also created an opportunity for government to promote public-private interventions that enable those women to be more productive. Thank you. And with that, I would like to know if you have any questions.
Okay, Val, here we have your own question. How can business education for women be scaled up? Which parties need to get involved or aligned, and what role should the private sector?
I'm sorry, I didn't hear.
Oh, sorry. Can you hear me?
I'm sorry, I didn't hear.
Can you hear me?
Yes, can I please?
Okay.
Yes,
so I'm
please.
saying there's one question here. How can business education for women be scaled up? Which parties need to get involved or aligned, and what role should the private sector have in this?
Okay. Business education scaled up for women. The person who asked the question, what do they mean by scaled up? How can it be scaled up? Because the business education that we do at Afrocosmo Development Impact is mostly at the grassroots level. And what we're doing is to make it interactive and organic and experiential. It's interactive because we're interacting with them at the grassroots where they are. It's almost like giving legal advice, but at the same time teaching legal education, but simplified. Because I've taught for over 15 years, I've taught business law and trade law and economic development policy and practice for so many years. And so the way I would teach it, or the way I've been teaching it to my students, wouldn't be the same at that level. So in other words, it's more of paying attention, not just substantive, but mostly practical. And so we're looking at transferring skills, communication skills, negotiation skills, critical thinking skills, exposing them to different areas. I give example of, you have a relative in the town that has money, that's secure transactions. I give the example of, the person who sells a different product from the woman who I took the photo, I talked to her. That's mergers acquisitions, telling them to merge, So I don't know if I answered your question, but I would think when you talk about scaling up, I am thinking more scaling, I don't know if I would call it scaling down, but I'm thinking more doing it as a grassroots level, exposing them to knowledge where they are, meeting them at where they, right. So that's why it's organic, because it's not like having a curriculum, which I've done and I do with my students in class. When I'm with these people, women in the streets, it's meeting them where they are, asking questions, having workshops that involve them and bringing them together through the different supply chains, from the farmer to the woman who's a retailer, from the woman who's a small-scale farmer, because you're connecting the supply chain, because networks build net worth too. So you're saving two birds with one stone, not killing two birds. I don't want any environmentalists to target me on that one. So we're sort of hitting the nail on the head with making sure that they're gaining that knowledge. So if you mean scaling up in terms of through the supply chain, I'm not sure if the person can come back with if I answered their question, whoever asked the question, but I'm sorry. I answered your question, whoever asked the question.
I didn't see the person, answer back, but I think that was quite encompassing, and it definitely gave a good angle from what you guys are working on. And I think that's
well, I see a question here. I meant with the slide itself.
No, that's not a question. That's not the Q&A. It's just in the general chat.
Okay.
Val, thank you so much for your amazing insights, and you were fantastic in the panel. Really, 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 just insightful points of conversations. Is there anything else you want to add before we wrap up the presentation?
Yes. I think in the end analysis, when we talk about, I think one area that I didn't expatiate on earlier was the question of technical skills and transfer of knowledge. I think that it's so important for us to sort of talk with the women. This forum is good that we're talking about women entrepreneurs, and because we have a lot of women entrepreneurs that are actually at that level, survivalists, I'm hoping that they'll be involved in talking with us, because I'm lucky enough that I'm not at that stage where I'm in the streets and I'm a survivalist SME. I'm a small scale farmer, but at the same time, I'm lucky that I have that possibility to help them. I think Hema asked the question of a superpower, and I hope that, we will pay attention to them and listen to them, as, the future, whatever the future holds for them, will be positive, because they really are going through a lot during this COVID season, and hopefully, they'll survive. And I think I always say optimistically, my slide, the last thing I said was that the female-owned African micro, small, medium enterprise trader are resilient. They're resilient survivalists that continue to survive through thick and thin. So that's the way I want to end it, on an optimistic note.
Thank you. Thank you so much. Thank you so much. I actually do see that there's another question or two. Do you have another 2 minutes? We'll just take,
yes, I do.
Patience here is asking, I think that technologies are a game changer for women SMEs in Africa. Which kind of tech, in your opinion, can help these women in this regard? Which kind of technology?
Very good question. In fact, we're currently working on low-cost solar and off-grid. Not only have I had sessions at the World Bank. The recent one we had was on off-grid, and we're currently working on helping village, especially the village, rural, women, on having access, because that's where we talk about affordable infrastructure. Providing that enabling environment, low-cost solar technology, and I know Israel is very good at this. You have a lot of low-cost technology. I know even with the AFCFTA, there's a possibility. One of the things we found is that there's high import duties, high tariffs on importation of, renewable energy for farmers, right? That's an area that needs attention, because yes, low-cost technology, simple to operate, very good, because transaction cost and also with low maintenance, operation and maintenance costs. Capital costs should be low, operation maintenance costs should be low, and also transaction cost in maintaining those technologies should be low. So those kind of technologies, especially in the farming, the food supply chain, especially at the cradle, side of things, meaning with farmers as opposed to the grave of food retailers, very critical. And there's a role for us to play in making sure that the government creates an enabling environment, be it for importation of those products and also training so that in terms of spare parts, if you bring in low-cost technology in the farming industry, you don't want them purchasing spare parts from Israel or from anywhere. Train them so that you could have a manufacturing
100%.
industry for the spare parts, that kind of thing. So very good question, because it's, you know, and training them on usage.
100%. So
yes.
Thank you so much.
Yes.
Our time is now up.
Yeah.
It's funny you mentioned it, ending it with energy, because our next event, virtual networking event on the 24th, Wednesday, is the Power of Energy. It's March 24th. It's 3 p.m. CAT. That's also GMT +2, and 9 a.m. EST. We have fantastic speakers on different types of energy. Really extremely interesting. Highly recommend coming to hear this panel. And again, networking event to meet the different investors, the different entrepreneurs, the different providers, and yeah, the energy community, and how we can do more business together.
It's awesome. I love it. Yes, wonderful. That's good. That's good.
Wonderful. Val, yes. Thank you again so much.
Thank you.
Stay safe and healthy. We'll be in touch soon.
Thank you.
And everyone is welcome to continue networking for some more time.
Oh, okay. Awesome. Awesome. I'll go back to networking now.
Bye-bye.
Take care.